You know the line, Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents.
I know someone who created
You've heard that
line.
before.
Yeah.
You do. With that said, will New Hampshire pick the next president of the United States?
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. Look, obviously I'm 110% behind Nikki. She's the one that's earning it on the ground. She's the one with all the momentum. Trump has his numbers. He's effectively the incumbent, but his numbers have been really stagnant. Nikki's the one that's been surging. She had a very good showing in Iowa. Right now, I think she just has to show that she's building on that here. If she can win, that'd be amazing, right? It doesn't have to happen. Carry that kind of momentum into South Carolina, into her home state with 3 or 4 weeks or something like that before the South Carolina primary even happens. And she obviously has a huge record of success running there. So, no, I'm very hopeful that this momentum is going to continue to build as we get into Super Tuesday.
But she's currently farther behind the former president in South Carolina than she is here in New Hampshire. So if she can't win here, how could she win there?
Well, no one's campaigned in South Carolina yet, right? So that should be expected. He's the incumbent. She hasn't been there and hasn't really put a campaign on the ground there. I mean, a little bit here and there. But it's Trump versus Haley. It is. So no one should be surprised because the conversation isn't happening on the ground there. As the conversation happened in Iowa, her numbers soared. As the conversation's happening in New Hampshire, her numbers soar. And as the conversation's going to happen in South Carolina, the sky's the limit for the former governor.
So winning New Hampshire is not necessarily required to win.
No, definitely. Were we saying back in November, December that New Hampshire was an absolute win, had to be an absolute win for someone other than Trump? No one's ever been saying that. I mean, recently Trump's trying to build that narrative effectively, but because he just wants to knock everyone out. But Nikki is the one that has knocked all these other candidates out of the race. Well,
you have said, though, a strong second could be in the offing. What does that look like? Define a strong second.
You know, I think, again, just showing I think stronger performance than was in Iowa. That's the most important piece, right? And having less candidates in the race and defining it as a one-on-one race. But over the last few days, again, with the momentum, with the fact that she's doing the grassroots campaigning, she's going all across the state. She's engaging with voters every which way. Trump flies in, does a rally. They're not even very big rallies, actually, and then flies out of here. So he's kind of taking advantage of his role as the standard bearer, if you will, of the party for the last 7 years. But she's the one that's earning it. And again, her numbers are soaring and his are stagnant.
Well, but his numbers are roughly in the ballpark of about half of voters. He had more than half in Iowa.
Sure.
He's polling around half of voters in New Hampshire, the same ones that voted you into office on multiple occasions. If it's the conservatives in Iowa and moderates and independents in New Hampshire, and she can't get enough of either, what is the demographic that is supposed to elect her as president of the United States?
Well, again, let's start here. Imagine if you're the former president. In your own party, you can barely get 50% of the vote. That's why Trump's in trouble, right? So now that you have somebody new on the scene, kind of building that kind of momentum is huge. And the key is that it's a one-on-one race. So if Trump can barely hold 50% or keep him under 50% in a one-on-one race, well, the math says that there's 51% to Nikki Haley, and that's what you need to win a state. Now, I don't think any of these early states are must-wins for Haley. I don't think that's ever been the case. They're possible, but they're not must-wins. I think when you get to Super Tuesday, okay, now you really have to start winning states, obviously. But as long as she keeps building on that momentum, I think there's a lot of opportunity. She has money, she has resources, she has, knows how to win in New Hampshire, knows how to win in South Carolina. So all the wind is at her back.
Annie Kuster sat in this chair a short time ago and said, we want you to write in Joe Biden. There's a write-in campaign for the president of the United States, which is remarkable. But she said, if not, vote for Nikki. Just don't vote for Trump. When you have a Democrat talking like this and Donald Trump across the street saying Democrats are infiltrating the process here to vote for Nikki
Democrats cannot vote. Democrats cannot vote in New Hampshire.
Of course they
Well, you say, of course. I had other stations. I mean, you guys get it, but I had other stations being like, talking about Democrats vote. Democrats are not voting in the Republican primary at all.
But this idea that Democrat-leaning independents are going to make a difference here in New Hampshire, and there aren't enough New Hampshires to keep doing that across the country.
Yeah, well, independents have always been able to vote in our process, both Democrat and Republican. And they're not independents in New Hampshire. They're undeclared.
Of course.
So you could have hard Trump supporters and hard Bernie Sanders socialists within the undeclared spectrum. This year, they're more likely to play on the Republican side because there's nobody cares about the Democrat side. So that's all. So you're just going to see a lot more folks play there. And they tend to want change. That's it. They want the next new thing. They want, there's the Republicans that are within that independent group really are Republicans, right? They understand Trump doesn't carry Republican values. Was he fiscally conservative? No. He had tax cuts that supposedly helped the economy, but then borrowed $7 trillion to do it. That's like saying to your family, hey, look at this wonderful new house we're living in, and you just paid for it on a credit card, right? It's a falsehood. He doesn't believe in limited government. He believes in this kind of dictatorship. He doesn't believe in local control. He believes in Washington. So those are not Republican values. So I think a lot of the Republicans within that undeclared and those conservatives are very much coming over to Nikki's side.
Would it be fair, Governor, to say the Republican Party that Trump represents is not your Republican Party, not the Republican Party of your father?
Put it this way. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that says, I don't vote Republican, I just vote Trump. He's his own entity. He doesn't define the Republican Party at all.
But you have said because if he were to be the Republican nominee and because you are a Republican, you would support him.
Yeah, I think most people would. That shouldn't surprise anybody. Yeah.
Even though you don't think he actually carries the values of the Republican Party?
Well, look, Joe Biden, that's how bad Joe Biden is. I mean, I always say that. I mean, this is what has happened with inflation and all of that. The one thing I suppose that I'm hopeful, again, I'm hopeful it's Nikki. I think she can do it. Any Republican would build a much better team than Joe Biden. I mean, the team that Joe Biden has put in there, and with the rules and the regulations that are just crushing families, they're just crushing locals and state governments, and nothing can be developed, nothing can be built, nothing can move forward. So no, look, I'm excited about Nikki Haley being the nominee. That's why we're here in New Hampshire. This is where I don't want to say it all turns around, because she's already made the turnaround, right? It's already gone from 13 candidates to a one-on-one race. That in itself is amazing. This is where, again, she just keeps adding kind of gasoline to that fire and keeps driving forward.
You talk about Trump team building. Of course, most of Trump's team has come out against him following the administration. Many of them
That
were
should tell you
fired
something.
on Twitter.
Yeah.
But so, you know, the quality of a team might only be as strong as long as you can keep it together. But I want to hear the argument, though. You're prepared to vote for Donald Trump if it's a Trump-Biden election. You've made that clear.
According to the polls, you know, most of America would. I mean, he beats Biden.
But
barely,
you're
I mean,
trying to
by
keep
1%.
that from happening.
Yeah.
Why is Nikki Haley, let's talk about your candidate, better for New Hampshire than Donald Trump?
So in the latest polls, New Hampshire hasn't gone Republican in the general election in about 20 years. And then the latest polls show that Trump gets crushed in New Hampshire against Biden. Nikki wins. Right? Nikki allows the Republicans in New Hampshire to win this state again in November. And that would happen in a lot of states across the country. So at the end of the day, you know, we can disagree on a policy here or there, but you got to win. You can't govern if you don't win. And Nikki not just beats Biden here in New Hampshire, but would beat him across the country.
It's interesting, though. You didn't reach for a policy. You just want to pick a winner, is your point.
Well, because you know what Nikki does? She makes sure that as I leave, we're going to get a Republican governor. And we're in Manchester right now. They should have a Republican congressman, but we haven't been able to win the seat, even though it's more Republican leaning. So because of that Trump brand, we've lost in 2018 and 2020. And 2022, I'm so tired of losing, and I'm tired of losers, and I think we're just tired of that brand that just drags the rest of the Republican Party down, right? What's the point of scraping out a win in the presidency if you lose everything else, like he has time and time and time again? So, you know, I want Republicans to win across the board. Nikki allows us to do that.
So do you think ultimately the biggest differentiator for you between the former president and Governor Ambassador Haley is not necessarily their policy differences, but their ability to execute on
That's
that
it.
policy?
You've hit it. So, Nikki, when you're governor, you don't get away with trying something and it doesn't happen and you just let it go. Healthcare reform didn't happen. Securing the border and building the wall didn't happen. Two of his biggest promises, right? Being fiscally responsible didn't happen. You know, decentralizing government, allowing states to have more control, didn't happen. So Nikki, as a governor, you're always held accountable. This is a 24/7 job for us. She goes in with that mentality, and she's going to manage the Senate. She's going to demand accountability. She's going to demand a balanced budget, right? She's going to demand that government at its core level just live up to its most basic expectations of getting something done and moving the ball forward. And she carries those conservative ideals to actually get it done. It's pretty cool.
Her closing argument, though, is that Donald Trump is a bully. He's too old. He's not cognitively well.
That starts the discussion. We could be here all day if we went through
this. He'll bring chaos.
Yeah.
But to think that you would vote for him as the nominee, knowing that you'd be inviting all of that back, says a lot about where we are.
But remember, if you don't, in a binary race, if you don't vote for one, you're voting for the other.
Okay.
And I ain't voting for Joe Biden. I don't think anyone wants Joe Biden on
Joe Biden is that much worse than the chaos and the bullying that you framed, though, is what you're saying.
Does Joe Biden has to be let off a stage by his hand. God bless the guy. He's not there. There's no management. There's no sense of control. There's no sense of any of this at all. So, you know.
And you think it's about potentially the future team that a second Trump administration could build. Should Nikki Haley be part of that team? Do you think it would be likely
Look, I'm just focused on Nikki Haley winning the primary right now. I mean, really, what Nikki wants to do in the future, she could do anything. I mean, she's that amazing and that qualified. The focus right now is showing America that Republicans are looking at an alternative. They might not want an alternative out of Biden. That's going to be a problem for Democrats. But on the Republican side, we're actually giving a shot here. We're not just saying it's a fait accompli for Donald Trump. Nikki's surging. A lot of folks are galvanizing behind her. We're going to have record turnout here. I mean, think about Iowa, right? When people say, well, I guess it's over. Because 56,000 people in Iowa voted for Trump. That's like 2% of the population. 56,000 people are going to determine the pick of the Republican nomination in America? I don't think so. No. So you got to let this thing play out. I know the media just wants to call it. It's a good talking point. But you got to let this thing play out and make sure that the voters, not the media, not me, not Nikki, but the voters, that's democracy. Let them go to the polls and decide what's going to happen.
You wonder if the party's trying to call this, though. That Tim Scott endorsement, I realize endorsements don't mean a lot to a lot of people, but
No.
the timing was significant. He could have waited for that to
Nobody
happen.
cares about Tim Scott.
South Carolina. Nobody cares about Tim
No.
Scott.
Nikki Haley doesn't care about Tim Scott. She
No.
appointed him to the Senate.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why the endorsement, right? So Tim Scott wouldn't be a senator without Nikki Haley.
right.
That's why what he did was so disrespectful. Again, why? Because the Senate doesn't want to be held accountable. Nikki's going to hold government accountable. That's an amazing opportunity for America. Trump didn't do any of that, right? So, I found the whole thing, pretty disrespectful, but nobody really cares. He's a senator.
How about your future? You're happy you didn't run. And by
sure.
that I mean for president and Senate. You made that pretty clear. Look at what's going on there now. You could be in the middle of that.
Oh, sure.
What's next for you, though?
I don't know.
Are you
Look,
looking at 28?
One thing, let me go back to Nikki a little bit. One thing Nikki and I both agree with, no, really, it's public service, not a public career, right? She wants term limits. And again, we don't have term limits in New Hampshire, but you self-impose them. You got to do the right thing. So you serve your state, or you serve your government, or you serve your community the best you can, and then you get back to
Do you go back in the private sector,
Yeah,
or do you have an
absolutely.
issues campaign that you might follow?
No.
Or you gotta
I'm just
figure that
looking
out?
forward to get back into the private sector, and that's what everybody should do. Service, then you get back to the private sector, you let new ideas and a new generation move forward.
But you're not taking 2028 fully off the table?
For myself?
Yeah.
No, I'm not running for anything in 28. I have no plans, no.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Fair
Sorry, don't mean to let you down. I'll still be on here. If you guys, maybe in a year, I'll send you a resume. Who knows? We'll see what happens.
That's for sure.
We'll take it up with our
Maybe you'll send
managers.
Nikki Haley a resume. You think she's going to be the next president, don't you?
Oh, that would be awesome. I mean, it would be awesome, and she can
You
do it.
seem to
She's
be
the
open
only
to
one.
options, though.
Of course, I'm open to everything. Look, I do have a 24/7 job. I mean, I literally am governor as we're sitting here, and I will be governor for the next year. But there's a lot on the table. I'm a business guy. I'm an economics guy. I love that kind of stuff. I love helping businesses. I think businesses get way too involved in politics and that sort of thing. And I'm a big believer when you're selling a product, focus on selling the product. Don't get involved in the political wokeism and all that kind of garbage. So we've helped a few companies here and there with that.
Well, Governor, we do business and economics here
Yes.
as well. That's kind of our thing here
Yeah.
at Bloomberg. And if you actually look at the economic data, if you look at how businesses are faring, you have the stock market at a record high. You have inflation on a downward trajectory, growth in the labor market still hanging in there. And I know you don't think that the Biden administration has been particularly successful, but is that not something that a future president and President Haley would want to replicate?
The most important data points are families. Let's look at national credit card debt. Let's look at what everybody owes, right? The spending that has gone on, not just with the government, but now with personal spending, and the fact that inflation is crushing folks. And this whole idea that the Fed is coming out and going to lower rates, I'm telling you, the piper has to be paid at some point. I think we are in store for an economic downturn. That's why I want an accountant like Nikki Haley to be president of the United States, because you need someone that can manage and understands these things at a fundamental issue. Donald Trump's economic policy is, I'll just keep borrowing money, and you guys will have to pay it back sometime to keep everything floating. And everyone gives him a pass on that. But at the end of the day, if you look at housing prices, if you look at the workforce issues that are happening across the country, limited services that are happening, the record high credit card debt, the fact that people are still struggling to put fuel in their homes, the fact that we're not energy dominant, which we should be, and Nikki wants us to bring it there.
Pumped a record amount of oil last year.
But we're not keeping up with what is needed. Yeah, you can pump a record amount, but again, if you're not keeping up with what is needed, you have supply chain issues that creates energy is at the heart of inflation. Inflation is created by one thing, right? Government prints and borrows too much money. That's it. That's all that causes inflation. But the second biggest issue around that is energy. We could be energy dominant, which allows products to go from A to B much quicker, products to be created a lot cheaper. And at the end of the day, inflation is the worst tax on low-income families you can imagine. Because A wealthy family can handle inflation. It might pinch us a little bit, but we'll be okay. Low-income families are getting crushed. They can't take their family to McDonald's for less than $35. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. So it's those on-the-ground issues. Stock market, okay, fine. That could be inflated, whatever it might be. These kind of big-ticket items that might be talked about in the press. But go out there and talk to these families. They can't find housing. They're getting, because you can't build it. Why? Because it costs so much just to build housing. And when you do, it's $2,500 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. These are the kitchen table issues. Childcare. Nikki was at a childcare center this past week. Families can barely afford childcare. And one of the reasons is we can't find childcare workers. So again, you got to have the education system to create the infrastructure, if you will, for all these issues. So you can talk about big ticket items here, but what's happening on the ground in America right now is very, very different.
I know you've got a lot of families figuring out when to fill up the oil tank.
Right now, right here in New
14 degrees
Hampshire.
outside this morning. It's a very real thing.
People on fixed income. You know, let's talk about the Social Security issue. Social Security is going bankrupt. By law, there is a 22%, 23% cut in benefits coming in about 10 years. That's in the law. Trump says that will do nothing to stop it, right? I'm not going to stop it. Nikki's the only one that has a way to stop the benefits from being cut and allowing everyone to keep the benefits that they've been promised. But she's the only one willing to engage on that issue. That's a huge issue. If you're a senior, you should be scared to death that Donald Trump gets
I'm glad
elected.
you mentioned that, because there's an ad running that the Trump campaign has that's got my face in it, talking to Nikki Haley about Social Security. It's remarkable. The claims in the ad go far beyond what she said. This is a big deal for an aging population in New Hampshire, never mind the rest of the country. Does she need to put a finer point on that policy and say this will be the age, and this is what we're going to tell 21-year-olds or 20-year-olds when it comes time for them to start paying?
So look, I think she's been talking about it. I think, again, the Trump ads and all the negativity and the lies and everything, he just says whatever he wants to say just to bash on Nikki. But at the end of the day, it's his complacency on Social Security that allows it to go bankrupt. He's effectively acknowledged it. And that cut is coming. And again, if you're a senior, you should be scared to death that you'd be potentially getting behind Donald Trump when he says the cuts are coming and there's nothing you can do about it.
He has that in common with Joe Biden, doesn't he?
That's right. They're both hands off.
Security.
But it is going bankrupt. This isn't like, oh, it might not. It is going bankrupt. The cuts are coming. Someone like Nikki Haley has to get in there to show how to maintain those benefits, maintain those services for the elderly, and again, allow the system to be solvent once again. It can be done. It's just good math. And again, it's also holding Congress accountable so they do their job as well.
Maybe you should have run. You could have brought that issue to Washington.